Welcome to episode 9 of the Liz McMullen Show. My author guests this evening are JD and Decky Bradshaw, who have agreed to be the first in my 3-part series on gender and sexuality. I'm so happy that they've decided to return to the show. Welcome, JD. Welcome, Decky.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me back.
I'm really happy to have you both back on the show, so thank you so much for coming. Lesbian fiction lends itself, obviously, to talking on gender and sexuality, but rather than approaching it from an academic standpoint, I'd like to hear about your beginnings. What were some of the things that you read? What was your first experience?
I asked my wife, who had been a lesbian for a while, I always say for a long time, but she wasn't that old, I said, I need to read some lesbian fiction. What should I read? And she said Curious Minds. So that was my first.
That was a hard book to read. I read it after the fact, I guess, because I started reading lesbian fiction when I was a teenager in college. And, I went to a Different Light bookstore or Oscar Wilde. These are in New York City. And I read a lot of different things. And then after the fact, I found about, our foremothers, and I read A Curious Wine, and I had a really hard time with that, with what happened to her with that guy. And, the writing has changed. In the 70s and the 80s, there was a lot of coming out stuff. And I think as time has moved on, there's more stories about people who already know where they stand. JD, what about you? What was your first lesbian fiction experience?
Believe it or not, it was a movie. It's Desert Hearts. Ooh, that was my first lesbian movie.
Me too.
well, my first really, really late at night, and I probably should have been sleeping. In fact, I know I should have been sleeping. It was maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, and I had this little tiny portable black and white TV in my room, and I'm flipping channels, and suddenly I see this group of women. It's some sort of cop mystery. It's a movie, and I think it was called The Glitter Dome, actually, and there was a murder mystery, and I guess this woman was killed, and the female detective ended up having to go to this lesbian bar, and these women are all very defensive, and I start hearing what I recognized later on as some feminist polemic, and I'm just like, what the hell am I watching? But it fascinated me. There's these women dancing, and there's just scene with women kissing, and then the antenna went dead, and the TV went out. So I don't know how much longer later, I stole the TV from my brother again, and it's late at night, and I'm watching TV, and I'm flipping through channels, even though I'm really, really not supposed to be doing anything but sleeping, and I see Natasha Kinski and Jodie Foster making out. And I'm like, oh my God, what is it with late night TV? Now I know why my brother likes TV. I'm keeping the TV. So it took me a while to find these movies.
Didn't The Hunger come out in the 80s as well with Susan Sarandon and Catherine Deneuve?
I actually did get that too. But I ended up learning about The Hunger from the same place I learned about Desert Hearts, which is, of all places, Cosmo Magazine.
Really?
My mom used to get it on a regular basis, and there were some good articles in there, on whatever. And Cosmo did something really groundbreaking. They did an article on lesbians, and they wrote about the movie Desert Hearts, and they also wrote about Catherine Deneuve, and they had a little bit of an interview with Catherine Deneuve, or at least a quote from her. And I was like, I have to read these. So I did. And I told my then boyfriend that they were homework. He wanted to hang out. I wanted to watch the movie.
And the rest is history.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the first lesbian literature books I ever read, one was called The Ladies, that a friend of mine lent to me, and it was about a lesbian couple who, I guess is sort of somewhere between Victorian and Edwardian England, and they're It's about their relationship and their life together, and they thought they were the only ones in the world. And it's based on a true story, and it always struck me because it was beautiful, but it was lonely. Mm-hmm. And the next book I read was Movie Fruit Jungle.
Yeah.
So that was my introduction. It would be years later, well, years, not like a dozen, but like a few. Like I would, once I started working in women's bars, that I had a few friends, or whatever you want to call them, people that you know and you're actually friendly to, and they're friendly to you, and sometimes they buy you coffee, and sometimes you let them get drinks for free. I suppose those, you think those are friends when you're that age,
Well, I mean, like, I remember when I was, I was underage and going to Henrietta Hudson and Crazy Nannies and Meow Mix and all these other, New York institutions. And I remember there was that kind of, they were looking out. I felt they were looking out for me, and some people would buy me drinks and whatnot and another. But I didn't drink very much. I was going out there to dance my little heart out. That was always my reason for being when I was in my teens and 20s was, getting out there on the dance floor. So I'd be the girl who would be in the bathroom, cupping the water into my mouth from the sink,
I used to have a hard time going out, people would tell me like I was too pretty to be gay. I had to be bisexual, because, coming into your own sexuality, all of that, it's a process. You don't just suddenly, emerge like Athena fully formed, you'd like to, but you don't. Mm-mm. And, I've always been an artist, I've always been, JD, and, I was very confused by the whole butch femme thing, because I went to the first gay bar I went to was a local bar here on Staten Island. And my friends thought they were doing me this big favor, bringing me there for, I think it was my 18th birthday. And I'm like, where's the women? And I realized those guys that I think look like my dad are the women. And it was really, really rough because I was just like, and the thing is they're actually all, now you gotta figure, I'm 18, right? These are women in their 40s and 50s and older, okay? And they're not just butch, okay? They are male chauvinist fucking pigs, pardon my French. And they are rude, they are disgustingly just nasty, and worse than any guy I had ever dated.
Oh, I had a good old school butch moment myself when I was about 22, and I used to have my nice spiky hair, and some nights I'd come out butch and some nights I'd come out femme. But and if drag queens can wear full gown regalia at any time of day, then I figured it was okay for me too. So I had this they used to call me red dress because of that was one of my signature things that I would wear were red dresses that worked for me. And this one had a kind of Marilyn Monroe drape in the front, with spaghetti strap with a red feather at the end of each strap. And it went in with the curves, and instead of being a full dress, it turned into a triangle in the front and the back. So very high cut on the thighs. And I had my lipstick on and my, all these different things, and my pretty perfume, whatever. And stilettos. I'm 5'8", so when I wear stilettos, I'm 6 foot or over. And I went to Henrietta's, and it was still daytime. It was summer. So I didn't care. It's like, I can work it. Drags can work it. I can work it. So I went, and I was standing at the bar, occasionally talking to people. And this butch woman came up to me and said to me that if I was going to wear a dress like that I needed to act more feminine. And I looked at her, and she was very adamant about it. She continued on and was making me pissed off. So I looked down at her and said, "You are not my target audience." She didn't know what to do with that one. I was like, "You're not going to get me to conform. Are you kidding me? No.
My moment came in the bathroom at the first lesbian bar I was ever in. My wife was wise. I was 26, and she decided to let me take me to the bars and show me what I had missed. And I was just having a ball, just 130 pounds of full of myself. And Debbie didn't dance, so I was dancing with everything out there and having a ball, get phone numbers in my pocket, and she's just laughing at me. And I go in the bathroom by myself, and this big woman in leather pins me to a wall. And that was my introduction to butch lesbians. And one of my friends happened to walk in the bathroom at the same time, and she'd been gay since her feet hit the floor. And she'd been in that bar since she was about 13 years old, so she knew everybody in there. And she said, "Hey, you don't want to mess with that one," and just pulled me out from under her and took me back outside. And I was like, "Wow, I had never seen a woman be that aggressive."
Wow.
That was kind of my introduction to it.
I had a weird moment in New York City. I was with gay boys that night. I went out with about 5 or 6 gay boys to Splash, which is this huge party, huge, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of boys. And one of the things that I found foreign and bizarre from when I first was in my early adolescence, I thought I was straight, and I didn't mind going to gay bars. I thought it was all fun with the gay boys and whatnot. But I felt very differently once I realized I was a lesbian. And what I mean is, a lot of the gay guys feel that it's okay to be very familiar with your body because you're a woman, and allegedly they're not interested in women ever, so they can touch you and be very physical with you just because, some kind of carte blanche. And I was walking away from my friends and going up to, a staircase, and this guy grabbed me, flipped me around, and pressed me up against one of the staircases and had his hand near my throat. I didn't think he was going to strangle me, but it shocked the fuck out of me. And I think he must have assumed that I was a fag hag and therefore it was fair game, that I was bisexual or something along those lines. But it scared the piss out of me, I'll tell you.
I think that one of the things that we're talking about is that sometimes even in these quote-unquote women safe spaces, it's safe to be a woman, yes, so long as you kind of look a little guarded or less feminine or less female, I should say, because I don't really want to. I think that the construct is exactly that, masculine, feminine. They're constructs, but I think that when you start to be revealed as a woman, through your presentation, that there's an automatic vulnerability there, and I actually really can't stand at all the rampant and violent and aggressive misogyny that exists within the lesbian community.
I'd agree with that.
I agree with that too. And there's just so much. It seems that I wouldn't call it lawlessness, but when you leave the straight paradigm and go into these gay spaces and you experience different things. I was in New Orleans. I decided I was going to do one of those things that you see in the movie where somebody leaves where they're from and starts a new life someplace else miraculously. I was very young and stupid to think it would work out quite that way. But I was so into the cinema aspect of it. I was like, hey, I'm plucky. I can do this. So I got a car and I drove from Jersey to New Orleans, and I was like, this is the place for me, I'm sure, because I visited there when I was a teenager, and it was not the place for me. But I was certain, but it works out that way in movies. Why would it work out here? And one of the things that I did...
The car should have broken down in a small town on the way there.
Yes, they should have.
A better story.
True. It would have made so much more sense to have that particular cliche.
Yeah, well, that's the rule about fiction, right? It has to make sense. Life doesn't.
There you go.
So, one of the things that I had done, once I I mean, I don't think I completely ever stopped being bisexual in terms of interest, I suppose. But culturally, I put that behind myself and decided that I liked living my life as a lesbian. And I know that there are people who go, lesbianism is not a choice. But for me, it was. I mean, I didn't stop dating men because, like, I didn't have attraction to them or couldn't have meaningful relationships with them. I just liked women better.
Well, you know, I gotta say that we're on the same page with that. You know, I find men pretty, some of them, you know, and I
think they're prettier with their clothes on.
It depends on the man.
It really does.
I don't know. I have a very strong appreciation for the male body. I just would rather them have on, like, jockey shorts or something.
Well, you know, you know, it's funny. I have to admit that I don't particularly find that part terribly attractive. You know, and most straight women don't either, so that doesn't bother me. You know,
it's not a pretty organ; it's the utility that women get from it. Maybe there are gay men who rhapsodize, you know, on the beauty and awesomeness of that. But yeah,
well, there are certainly enough lesbians rhapsodizing about the beauty and awesomeness of our particular parts. So.
Or the straps that we buy, or whatever.
I'm gonna be just really plain. All right, because it wouldn't be me if I wasn't. But seriously, the only people who aren't going around worshiping the cock, it seems, are straight guys, and they worship their own. Seriously, I mean, it's everyone. Gay men worship cock, lesbians worshiping cock, straight women worshiping cock, and straight guys are like, "Hey, I've got one."
Hey, I've got one.
You know, seriously, it's like, hello? It's just, it drives me nuts, though, because, you know, there seems, I know that you know, we reflect culture. Culture becomes, you know, completely absorbed within self, you know, all those sorts of things, and I get it. But, oh my God, doesn't anybody ever take a moment sometime and think, hey, you know, we're forgetting something here, like, oh, I don't know, like, we're women, you know, and that's not a bad thing.
I totally understand what you're saying, and my wife was always saying to me, she dated men, and then she's exclusively dated women after that. And I dated guys and was married, had a kid, got divorced, and we both said it. If we wanted a man, we would have gone and gotten one. We celebrate our womanness.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And don't get me wrong. I have nothing against being what I consider bigender. Mm-hmm. You know.
Correct.
Yeah, I have nothing against that. I think that the most amazing gift you can give your lover is to be able to make love to them and with them as a woman, as a man, as if they were a woman, as if they were a man, and mix it up. I think that is an amazing and beautiful gift of freedom that you give yourself and you give your lover. And I don't think that in that context that your actual biology needs to matter so much.
Yeah, a lot of the erotica that I write does play with that idea, you know, of, you know, trying on for size, all these different things, whatever works for you and what you're comfortable with. For me, I was always seeking freedom from the time that I was, you know, ta-da, out of the womb. I was always looking, you know, freedom to be myself. And when I was growing up in the straight culture, there were a lot of prohibitions for me. I was always very wild and free and loved to dance and be sexual and sensual, but without being a target. And one of the reasons why I preferred and stuck with lesbian culture was that I could go out on the dance floor, right? And I could be sexy and I can dress sexy, whatever I want. And I don't have to worry about, you know, a predator, you know, somebody, thinking, oh, if you dance that way, if you talk that way, and if you dress that way, then it's okay for us to see you as free game. And I know this is not a nice thing to think about, but getting raped was something I was always worried about, because that's what they teach you. You have to watch your behavior. You have to watch what you do and what you say, because you don't want to, get a guy past the point of no return. So I found going into gay spaces that I felt safer. And the times that I would get pissed off was when I thought I was in a safe space and I wasn't.
Yes, exactly. And that's where that whole, I don't know if you've been paying attention, but the dialogues right now are really big about rape culture.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
We are subsumed by it. And that's what you're talking about right now. I mean, I remember, and it's funny because we're coming off the whole thing about, sexual identity. And it's probably even a more important conversation in some ways, the one that we're having. But I remember being so small that I wasn't even in preschool yet. And I was wearing my favorite skirt. My absolute favorite skirt. It was navy blue. And it had a little gold chain on the waist. And it had a little teddy bear charm. I loved that skirt because, it was pretty and it was a pretty color. Because when you're a kid, you don't think about skirts or pants. You just like what you like. And it had a teddy bear on it. I mean, come on, it's cool. And I was sitting on the floor, and I was told to move from where I was sitting and sit a different way because you could see my underwear.
Oh.
And I wasn't even old enough to do anything. I had no idea what that was about. It made me mad, and then it made me feel bad because I kept getting corrected. And so I started being reluctant to wear my skirt. And I had a lot of pretty dresses as a little kid. But the more I got told, you can't climb trees, or you can't do this and you can't do that, and I came to realize that these prohibitions kept coming whenever I wore a skirt. Mm-hmm. And why? Right. Because you don't want a child to show their tush or the implication that they may have, a genital area, because it may excite a rapist.
When I was, because I was born in '76, and I think that I've been really firmly imprinted about molestation because there were a lot of kids getting kidnapped and awful things happening to them, and
that was the 70s.
Yes, and Adam Walsh and all these things that stuck with me and made me aware of adult things way too soon.
Well, when it happened to you in the 60s, they told you to shut up and not talk about it.
I give credit to the women from the 50s and the 60s, and even the women before that, because they're the ones that got tired of shutting up. Mm-hmm. I mean, I was a tiny little kid in the 70s when I remember that they were stealing babies, and it would seem like every other day a young, beautiful girl was being killed. Another body was found somewhere. Mm-hmm. And it was like a disease the country had. And I think it's the women at the time who, they were grown-ups. They were women. I was literally a baby. And they were the ones who were saying, okay, let's raise consciousness. They were the ones who were saying, let's do something.
Yeah. It's a very hard topic to be on, but it definitely shaped my perception of the world.
We can talk about it. I'm just going to be quiet.
Okay.
I totally I understand, and I am a loud voice for victims, and the culture has changed for us in so many ways that it isn't as hard to tell someone mm-hmm. and to get help, but we have a long way to go in stopping blaming the victim for what happened to them.
When when I was in the 80s, they started having these people come to school, the good touch, bad touch. They're trying to, educate us as to what was okay and what was not okay. And so I don't have any recollection of something happening to me, but I have a very strong...
Worst thing they ever did was stranger danger. It's usually not a stranger.
No, it's not. But what happened... I don't have a memory of something happening to me, but I'm fairly certain it happened. I'm also fairly certain it was a woman. And I'll explain it a little bit further down the line of the story. But I was sexually aware way too young, and I must have been in the 2nd grade, and my Barbies were always having sex. And one of the friends of family, somebody that I grew up with, was in the same school and told the counselors that I was playing that way. And I was so horribly ashamed. I was in the car. My mom was taking me to my tutoring class. I'm dyslexic, so I had a tutor that I saw twice a week. And in the car going there, she explained to me that I was going to have to start going to a child psychologist so that they could see if something had happened to me. And at the end of it all, they weren't able to discover anything, but for so much of my life, I had a lot of shame associated with, that particular incident or, sexuality in general. And so it shaped me and made me so much more aware of these kind of things than I guess, a child who did not experience that. And in college, there was this awful moment where I was interested in the same guy as this other woman. And she was upset that he was interested in me and not her. And there was a night when I was in his dorm room that I was afraid he was going to rape me. But I couldn't leave because I was at UMass campus. I didn't have a car, and the 5 college system bus was done for the night. And I was more afraid of trying to walk through Southwest and potentially getting raped on my way, trying to escape, than staying in his dorm room for the rest of the night until it was, an acceptable time for me to leave. And then that woman who wanted him said that my night where I was afraid I was going to be raped was a night where I had sex with him. And she said that I acted like I lost my virginity when I was 5. And it was like...
What's it supposed to mean?
I don't... It's, there's this... The misogyny is so strong in the hands of other women. And other women often keep us in line and treat us that way.
Well, have you ever noticed some women, they're victimized. They victimize men. And what they do is they raise their sons to be weapons at other women. So again, you see the cycle sort of perpetuates itself, and it's revenge-based thinking, it's wounded-based thinking, it's not inappropriate. It's not an inappropriate response in the sense that it's normal. It's normal to have those responses as a human being. The problem is that. It's not healthy to be that way. And that's a person who is wounded and still bleeding and still hurting and sharing that wound. And
I call that limbic living. It's when you're letting your limbic system and your base emotions run your life.
I think one of the reasons why I didn't, this was some, just to close out the thing I was saying before, I think one of the reasons why I was so latent in realizing that I was a lesbian was because I think that the person who did something to me was a woman. Because I have a blackout for a certain period of time at a particular age. And the reason why I think this is also, this one time I was with my girlfriend, and we were driving from California to Jersey, and I had it in my head that I wanted to have some dirty girl sex, but by the time we got there and got settled up and we started to have sex with each other, it wasn't that tone exactly, and we were using a strap-on at the time. And just moments into it, and by the way, my girlfriend at the time, totally sweet and unintimidating in the least, and I started shaking uncontrollably, like fear shaking uncontrollably. And she took me into the bathroom, we turned on the shower, and she held me until I stopped shaking. And the reason why I believe it was with a woman is because I had been with many men in my adolescence, in my college years, and not a single time, no matter what way I was interacting with them, did it ping that kind of response. And I had that happen and something else happen, and it's like, you know, I think I would have figured out a lot younger if there wasn't something that was blocking me, because I didn't figure it out until I was 19 and saw one girl, and I had a crush on her. And it was brief. She was just in, like, Haight-Ashbury in a store. She was working. And I thought she had this great punk rock look around her. And in my head, it finally clicked. And I was like, wait, I like girls.
Which is a lovely thing.
It is a wonderful thing. It is a wonderful thing. And one of the things that makes me a little sad is how many of the women that I've been with have been, at some point in their life, abused. But one of the things that JD said once we turned the recording off so she could answer the phone was that her brother has a particular role, a really positive role, when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, my brother he's a leader in terms of training for awareness about sexual abuse within the military, within the Navy specifically. You know, obviously, it's not just, you know, women who get raped, it's men as well, you know, and there were certain things that were considered, like, acceptable behavior. For example, like a new guy on a boat, you know, he's sleeping in his bunk, and somebody would walk around and grab his junk, you know, or they'd wait till the guy was totally passed out, and then, like, they'd strip him from the waist down and turn him over and, like, dump, like, somebody would actually have to do this, so you got to wonder about the mentality of that person, but make them think that they've been anally, you know, penetrated and leave, like, you know, lube or whatever, like, literally all the way up in their butt.
Ugh.
So, I mean, and this was considered normal guy play among men. So, you know,
there's something wrong with that culture. You know, I put a quote on my webpage today about Jodie Foster was talking about that just because it's culture, it doesn't make it right. I don't remember the exact quote, but it was like, you know, just because it's a cultural thing doesn't make it acceptable. And we have to change the way we teach our children. Mm-hmm. Not just the guys, but the girls too. You know, at that Steubenville thing in Ohio, there were women standing around watching that unconscious girl be abused. There were young women standing there watching that, and nobody spoke up. And that disturbed me as much, if not more, than the fact that the boys let it go on. But
the thing is, if they don't play cool, and this is actually, Liz, I wanted to address this to you directly for what you had said before about that difference of comfort and being able, you know, not having that response with men, but having that response with your girlfriend. But that makes sense because you felt safe. What in the hell would have happened if you'd had that response with the guy?
Luckily, I have been very, very fortunate but also I guess it's intentional. The types of men that I dated, I was always looking for, you know, the guy with the good heart, like the athlete scholar, somebody who, you know, I respected. And I
was looking for a guy with a boat.
A boat. Ha! And there, I missed the boat on that one. But
sorry.
No, it's fine.
I thought it was in the Navy.
In the Navy. Yeah. I think, you know, returning to an earlier topic about safe zones, and I had been, I guess what probably happened to me now, looking at it, you know, 2020 hindsight, is I was sick of being saddled with the straight culture. I was sick of having to watch how I talked, how I dressed, how I acted.
Last thing I heard was you were sick.
I'm sorry?
I got you.
Yeah. So,
I just totally lost you there.
What was I saying? I was sick of being saddled with the straight culture, whereas I had to monitor how much did I drink, how much, how was I walking, how was I dressing, how was I talking. And I was taught at a young age that, you got to watch what you drink, because if you're not paying attention and if you're not watching things, you could put yourself in a bad situation.
Well, there's been, I don't know that there's been an explosion of lesbian on lesbian violence, but I think we see more of it now. I think it's probably always been there. And it goes back to that, what you were talking about before, the misogyny has drifted into our connections with each other.
Yes.
And it's almost like some of our young people aren't being taught what is a healthy relationship, and they look at a fighting physical relationship as something that is normal. And I think we need to change that perception, not only with the our straight teenagers, but our gay teenagers as well. It is not acceptable to be violent in any way to anybody. If you're that angry, walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that part of the issue, though, is that there's, you've got like a whole bunch of different things layered over stuff. You've got the misogyny that, inbred and literally it's in the warp and weft of our culture. On the one hand, on the other hand, you've got a shame culture going, about sex, period, end. And then you've also got another shame culture going over the whole, anger thing. Anger is a normal emotion. Anger is a natural emotion.
Absolutely.
And the thing is we have anger in response to threat. Unfortunately, what happens is that we have a lot of people who have been threatened since they were young children. And the only response they know to threat is to threaten back.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's, basically, as Sinead O'Connor once said, the problem in the world is child abuse. Everything stems from child abuse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that anger comes from. That's, even the inability to deal with it in a healthy way. It all stems from child abuse. So which issue do you repair first? And how do you repair from the inside out?
That's the question of the ages, I think.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is figuring out what to do with when you feel so overwrought you don't know how to react in a healthy way. Not saying that you're going to act upon it or be violent with somebody else, but just like they teach peaceful resolution of trouble solving, problem solving. There also needs to be a level of teaching of how to cope with certain emotions when you feel like when you've just hit the wall. You're so tired and exhausted and worn down, and you don't have that cushion to kind of help. And not talking about violence in particular, but this my most recent experience with Hurricane Sandy, I got an education in what it feels like to be completely depleted. Like I had no reserves. Like we were going around and we still don't have a proper home. We're living with in-laws back and forth. But I remember those first few days, those first few weeks, it was a very intense feeling of, I just don't have any boundaries. I don't have my armor. I'm just exhausted. And
so imagine what that feels like to be a child.
Exactly.
And that's your world every day. It's not necessarily a hurricane, but it's a physical or emotional hurricane every time you walk through your door. And you're told at school to resolve problems, in these games. And then you go home and you see that your adult relations they have no clue how to resolve any issues. And a child doesn't know any different unless they're exposed to other people's homes. My mother didn't like for us to spend the night away from home. She was like very, very possessive of us. So I didn't spend very much time in other people's homes. I thought my home was fairly normal until I got old enough to go into somebody else's home and realize that, other people don't yell at each other when they talk. They actually have conversations and resolve issues. Mm-hmm. So it took me into my adult years before I was able to resolve my own issues without losing my temper, because that was the model that I had been raised with. So we need to empower our children to understand that things aren't normal and they need to get help somehow. That's a difficult road to hoe right there.
I had worked with this young girl, and she's very bright. I got to her when she's just before turning 3, and but she'd have these horrible tantrums. And from my perspective, how terrifying must it be for a child to be caught in a tantrum and not know how to calm down, not have any coping skills? So for months I was working with her, and this one day I remember particularly the tantrum lasted almost an hour. And I was just sitting there, at the table with her, calmly asking her, are you sad? Are you angry? Giving her the words that she needed to express herself. And eventually she went from having these, freakouts where she just didn't know how to come back down. She eventually was able to use her words to express frustrations rather than have frustrations and have no words. And I think that's the key to kind of learning how to cope with emotions that you can't control. So let's say for me as an adult, if I'm at a point where I'm completely depleted and I can't handle, any kind of conversation right now, I'm like, I don't think we can talk about this right now. Let's return to it at another time, because I don't have the coping tools that I need to be able to deal with this in the moment.
Right. Well, I think, those sorts of skills not only are, of course, they're valuable, but I think that they're difficult to teach, and you have to have tools. I know how to use them well before you can teach them. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing, is that you've got people, all of us really, we're lacking in certain types of tools. I mean, I grew up in a house, and like most of my peers did, and my peers come from a certain type of middle class background, so we got whacked all the time.
Oh
yeah. The face, Eddie Murphy used to make the joke about the shoe. My mom could do the shoes off blind.
Yeah.
She's good. She's almost 5'2".
Hey.
Almost 5'2". I can't tell you how many shoes they got hit with around corners, down the stairs, like magic, Nowadays, you turn around and say, my mom got the shoe. They're like, we're calling the cops. Back then, your cops would be like, I'll hold her down and help you.
Oh my God.
And there was a lot of screaming and a lot of yelling. And when there wasn't that, and don't get me wrong, because, my parents loved me. They were just doing what they knew how to do. That was it. Yep. That's what they were taught us. And the thing here is that they were much gentler with us than my grandparents were with them. Mm-hmm. And my grandparents were gentler with their kids than their parents were with them.
Mm-hmm. I definitely, I'm there with you on that, because, years later I asked my dad about, what do you think was going on in your head? And he's like, I was afraid that I wasn't going to be able to afford it all. He was afraid that he wasn't going to be able to provide for his family. And he came from a family where his father passed when he was 18, and he's one of 7 kids. And they had a lot of stress because of money. And so his mind was always about, I never want my kids to feel the way that I felt. But as a result, the stress of him trying to provide and things, not going his way here and there, and the only way that he knew how to deal with this, his anger and rage and frustration was to express it that way. But that, as we've said, it's not that common for, the people raised in the generations that we were in.
Exactly. But ironically enough, I found, when I made friends with people who came from a different economic social class, the majority of them had upbringings that were vastly different than mine. There was no corporal punishment. Yet these kids, they were great kids. They were very well behaved. They got great grades in school. They didn't really get into trouble other than the normal teenage stuff. Their parents did not need to control them with the shoe.
Yeah, my wife never had a spanking in her life.
Ooh.
And if she got in trouble, which was maybe she got a B once and had to move the the encyclopedias from one bookshelf to another, and that was her punishment. She was harder on herself than her mother was. They didn't yell. It was totally amazing to me. I didn't know that families did that they just liked each other and smiled a lot. I was like, wow, this is so cool.
That's like the Brady Bunch.
Yeah, perfect. But you know what? That perfect family was not perfect. After we got together, her parents divorced after 40 years. So you never know what's really going on behind those doors.
Yeah, I agree. And the thing that, just bring up for myself is that I don't want to make invisible the things that happen behind closed doors of, affluent families as well. And one of the things that, I took this class at Mount Holyoke. It was called Sex and Politics, but it was the most horrifying semester I've ever had because it talked of all the different things that, were done to women, from, sexual abuse, all these kind of things. And one of the things that they made specifically clear is you could be just as beaten as, like, I guess, whatever other class can be. It's not only, for the middle class and, I can't even use the word lower class without grimacing, but, you weren't safe anywhere,
we're not talking about abuse.
Oh.
We're talking about discipline styles.
Discipline styles.
Things.
Oh, okay.
Because abuse, now that's a different thing. Now, I work in social services, so I can tell you that abuse happens across all economic lines.
Yes, it does.
The same proportions. So physical abuse, addiction, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, whatever kind of abuse you can think of that's out there, in proportion in terms of our society as human beings, it tends to be ubiquitous, and that proportionally is the same. It doesn't matter about the economic status. It doesn't matter about even the cultural background. And in fact, in the enmeshed cultures, you'll find that some of those things are even worse and more they're not necessarily more rampant, but they're certainly more virulent and probably more vicious because it's the nature of the enmeshed culture to be secretive. Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by enmeshed?
By enmeshed, I'm talking about anything that comes across as tribal. And the best example, or the best test, if you would, of enmeshed is we don't tell outsiders our business. We handle it from within. So when you have that going on, you can guarantee there's some sort of enmeshment because there's no individualization of the members of that group. Their value is based on being part of the group as opposed to their individual value. And even in non-tribal communities, and by that what I mean is smaller units like families, when you have we handle this within, you have enmeshment. You also have what's called collusion, which is the agreement that we'll lie that this is fine and this is okay, so we can maintain a level of peace, a level of facade of rightness or correctness, and these things are actually all pathologies.
So, Janie, if you could kind of conclude in your mind, how do you think our discussion that started talking about gender and sexuality and coming out has taken us to the place to where we got to during the episode?
I think perhaps that we were acknowledging very freely that to be a woman in this culture as is right now, it makes no difference if you're straight or gay or whatever beautiful color in the rainbow in between. You are automatically a target. Mm-hmm. You were born with a vagina. You are a target. From the moment the doctor looks at you and says, it's a girl.
And you see that same targeting going on in the lesbian community.
Well, we've internalized it. We've internalized, how many of us have internalized homophobia? Why wouldn't we have internalized misogyny as well? And that's been around a lot longer.
I think you're correct. I had an eye-opening experience 2 years ago. I went to a lesbian bar for the first time in 15, 20 years with my best friend. We both were meeting in a town that we did not live in, and I won't mention the town, so I don't talk about the bar. But it was a great little bar. We got there early, and neither one of us had been in a bar forever. Right. She's got a small kid, and so we get there early, and it's kind of a much younger crowd, obviously. And as the night progressed, we stood back and watched, and we were kind of dumbfounded at the actual. You could actually see such a difference in the community now that we didn't see 25 years ago in the bars. You didn't see as many women out there dressed like women. I mean, just to the nines. It may be because I was in Norfolk, Virginia, at the lesbian bars at the time, but this was, in a college town 25 years later, and there were the little boys, there were the bitches with their beautiful femmes on their sides, and there were and then there was us, and there were a few of us who were not really labeled. You couldn't really put a label on us. We were just women hanging out in the bar. But I found it fascinating that the bar included pole dancers in lingerie. And I thought how misogynistic that was. Although I enjoyed it immensely and spent lots of money. I tucked a lot of dollar bills. But it did strike me as interesting that we have gone that far now that we have women, half-naked women dancing on our bars now, in lesbian bars. And that just seemed I don't know, it just struck me as odd. It may be my age, I'm 51.
I don't think it's I think it depends, because my past, when I graduated from college and continued to go to the different bars that I went to, the majority of my friends worked in bars, and the lion's share were all go-go dancers. And I can see how it can appear, and there are some places where you go to and it's very degrading and sleazy, whereas my friends were celebrating their sexuality and feeling themselves. I don't know if that makes sense.
I was just saying that there's a difference. There's a qualitative difference. And I sometimes you can feel it. I remember my friends took me out. It was like my 27th birthday, and we went to. One of them had never been to a lesbian bar before, even though she was dating another friend of ours. And, I hadn't been out in a while, and because I just hadn't. And I brought them, we all went to this bar, and I didn't expect there to be this woman literally dancing on the bar. Mm-hmm. So, yes, and I was a little embarrassed because, in the bars that I actually used to go to before that, where they had strippers on a regular basis, and the strippers always used to pick me, So it's just, they were just.
Well, there's nothing wrong with a stripper profession, and hey, I like a good lap dance just as good as the next person. But I did find it odd that the same kind of behaviors that you would see in a male bar with a woman dancing, they had to have a bouncer. They had to be pulling women off of these girls who were they were being obnoxiously drunk and pawing at them.
See, that
shocked me. I hadn't seen that behavior in women.
I see where you're coming from on that. And interesting.
I hadn't seen that. That kind of didn't exist. In that context. In those places that I was, and that's sort of. But I think that there's a huge rise, in misogyny, and including within our own culture. Do you think that also it goes along with our rise in I call it the too much information age, where people share everything that happens behind the privacy of their closed bedroom doors, and sexuality is so openly overt at times. And I used to see it in the gay community among the men. Our gay parades used to have the guys with nothing on but G-strings, and I go, is that really the image you want to portray? And then now within the lesbian community, there was so much. I guess I keep going back to I'm old because we kept things so close to the vest about what we were doing. Well, that seeing people being overtly sexual is shocking to us.
Well, the other thing that has changed. Cha-ching. One of the things that has changed over time, and I also attribute it to, I think about it, the Girls Gone Wild effect, is that originally when, in the 90s when I was going out, and most of my friends were go-go dancers and stuff like that, they were celebrating their sexuality, and it was about cabaret and feeling your sensuality. As time has gone by, the interest in showmanship has diminished to the point where it's just folks who are willing to wear certain things and behave a certain way in front, and like half the people don't have any kind of respect or boundaries, as to what's acceptable behavior. And for me, I've played the role of bodyguard a lot with my friends when they were up on the podium and whatnot. But I still considered it guarding space as well. They should be able to express and be that way and not have to.
Absolutely.
Do you understand what I'm trying to say with that?
Totally get that.
No, but I mean, I'm not saying that it's divorced from misogyny. But what I'm saying is, I wanted them to have that space to feel like, whether they be belly dancing or doing whatever costumes and roles in the same way that drag queens would. I would go. I took a friend of mine to Espolita last year, and there were drag queens performing, and I went up to tip the drag queen, but instead of trying to get into her space or be very intimate where I put the tip, I got down on one knee and I presented the dollar to her and treated her like the queen that she is. It's like a form of appreciation and knowing how to interact with folks. Whereas nowadays, it's just like whoever's willing to like throw on revealing clothing, jump up in a line, do whatever and go. There's no show. There's no longer a show. It's just parts.
It's I think that we're probably trying to tackle too many things at the same time.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, because I was all ready to get into the whole thing about how when I tell somebody I write lesbian fiction, their automatic assumption is that I write erotica. And I think that is the pervasive attitude about lesbians in general. We must be sex craved. We must be. And so when I see that behavior, we're playing right into that image.
Well, here's the thing about that image of hypersexuality. Like it or not, it's a source of power. And if the only power you have, I'm going to be graphic here, guys, so like I said, you're just going to have to deal with me. The only power you have is your fucking cunt. You're going to use it.
Well, all right then.
Well, go away!
I mean, seriously, it's the only power you've got, and you've been victimized over and over and over. And the question then becomes: is this empowerment, or is this revenge?
Yeah.
For me,
we could have another whole hour on
that one.
Because, that whole issue of are we representative of what we are? Our books, our entertainment, is that representative of who we really are? Am I the one who doesn't? Am I the odd fellow out, or are there more people that think like I do? It's one of those things that it would really be interesting to have a room full of women and discuss it and have a discussion, because we would probably need a very strong-minded moderator.
I guess the thing that I keep on piping up, and I've spoken about it at different points during the interviews, I wanted space to behave in the way that I wanted to. And my friends, a lot of the friends that I chose who were go-go dancers, were that we were able to be those things and behave that way and not worry about reprisal. For the most part, nothing's perfect. So for me, it was an important thing, and expressing myself sexually in a way where I didn't have to worry about, is somebody going to be waiting for me in the parking lot? Is there somebody going to be waiting for me as I'm walking to the path to go home at night? Where I would, in that space, in like Henrietta's or wherever else I would go, Lover Girl, Hershey Bar, I could be safe to be myself in that context. And yes, you have to follow all the rules when you leave. But for me, the gay bars were a sacred space where I could express myself and not have to worry about, oh no, you're not supposed to, dance that way, dress that way, behave that way, I know.
Well, the thing is, I think that in terms of, we're back to the whole thing about safe spaces. Mm-hmm. And, I think that the most important place to create a safe space is, and this is a really hard thing to do, is to do what they call the U-turn, back to self. You have to be safe in you. Mm-hmm. And once you can be safe in you, then you can be safe in other spaces. That doesn't mean danger doesn't exist.
No.
Danger is a real thing. But the fear dissipates, and you can balance the two out. So how do we make ourselves feel safe within ourselves? Mm-hmm. Because, the thing that we're afraid of, there's a counterpart to that. You're afraid of someone's aggressive sexuality, aggressive, grabby need, if you would. Mm-hmm. Well, isn't that a reflection of what's within? Aren't we as women taught to be afraid of our own sexuality?
Absolutely.
I just wish that we could be more accepting of each other and our differences. Mm-hmm. There's that old argument, I think it was the Women's Music Festival in Michigan, where they had that huge blow up about not wanting the trans women.
Yes.
And I for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why we would be telling anybody they couldn't be who they wanted to be. It didn't make sense to me. But it was it goes back to that not feeling safe. They use that word so much, and I kept thinking, what? You're not safe? But so that doesn't. I don't understand. I wish we could open up a dialogue and be more accepting of each other, butch, femme, trans, whatever we are, we're women, and that makes us all one.
To a small degree, and I say this because it's just a small thing, I can understand the kickback that the sort of women's community, the purist women's community gives about the whole transgender thing. I get the kickback, and it doesn't necessarily mean that I fully empathize, sorry.
That's okay, dogs are great.
He's the dog'sness, he really is. I do get that kickback, and the thing is, again, though, we're looking at that, sorry, he'll come down in a moment.
I think you're right, about the safe space and the hungering for safety. even though, like, you know, maybe it's somewhat of a illusion. But, like, I guess for most of, I was so sick of being informed about, you know, careful of your unsafe behavior because you don't want something to be brought down on you for behaving in a certain way. And also, you know, going to women's college and also encountering a lot of purists, feminists, who would see that the only way that a go-go dancer could feel is degradation. And the only, you know, if you're dancing or behaving in this way, you're playing into, you know, the misogynist culture that hypersexualizes women. And I was like, why can't I just be able to be myself and do things that makes me feel good and that I feel are healthy choices without being told that those choices couldn't possibly be good? You know.
Well, again, you know, it's we come back down to that whole, you know, making ourselves feel safe. Mm-hmm. How do we do it? You know, and how do we do it in such a way that we can walk the walk? Mm-hmm. You know, and once we do that, you know, things open up. You know, we're saying that we're afraid of men. Well, maybe we're afraid of our own maleness, and by that, what I mean is, you know, the things that are culturally constructed as male. You know, we're afraid of other women. Well, what are we afraid of? You know, that aggressiveness. Well, maybe we're afraid of our own aggression. Maybe we need to own those things, and not own them in such a way that we become caricatures of ourselves, but just own it. Just be like, you know what? I am a sexual person. I am an aggressive person. I am capable of these things. I choose to do them or to not do them. Mm-hmm. You know, those are, you know, I'm not hiding from my potentials, both good and bad, as a human being. And, you know, and maybe also taking a moment to examine and say, all right, you know, this is something that really, really scares me. Mm-hmm. Well, it really scares me. What can I take? How can I transform this into a positive aspect of self? Mm-hmm. You know, how do I use this in a good way? You know, we talked about anger, and we've talked about abuse, we've talked about all these different things. And, you know, one of the things we did, you know, sort of hopefully agree on is that, you know, anger is not, it's not a bad thing. There's no value on it. It just is. Anger is the result of other emotions and other situations. It's a result feeling. It's mm-hmm. not a primary emotion. You know, mm-hmm. Loss is a primary emotion. You know, fear is a primary emotion. Lust is a primary emotion or a primary drive. You know, love, attraction, these things are primary. You know, other things are secondary. Mm-hmm. So, you know, this is a secondary thing. How do we harness it mm-hmm. and reshape it to use it in a positive way?
So what would be one parting thought that you'd like to leave before we close down this particular episode? Jackie, what would you like to say?
I was thinking, I don't know, I just would like for the younger lesbians that probably won't be listening to this show, but I worked with high school kids a lot, and what I saw was that if they had just a little bit of guidance, they could make better decisions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's true of us as adults as well. And I would like for our community to not be quite as judgmental of each other. And I think I'm going to try to own my aggression too, JD. I've always had that label. You know, you get that label. If you're a strong woman who is outspoken and speaks her mind, you're a bitch. If you're a guy that does that, you're a great dude. Mm-hmm. So you know, that's my parting comment. I'm going to own my bitch for a while.
I was going to say, I'm proud of being a bitch.
There we go.
I like to affectionately call it edge.
Edge.
I've always had a preference for women who have an edge. Somebody who's like, Yeah, I'm a bitch too. I've learned diplomacy over the years. That's an interesting thing that did not come natural to me at all. I don't know if you understand, JD. It's just not something that's in the water in the Hudson. Diplomacy is not in the water in the Hudson.
See, I'm Southern. We have diplomacy down pat, but we're not really. We say things we don't mean. Mm-hmm. And you have to try to figure out what we're really saying in between it. So
you needed like subtext Rubik's Cube.
Yeah. It's like that whole thing with on the closer when she say thank you and she didn't, fuck you.
Bless her heart.
Yeah, we learned that one. So I'm gonna stop saying thank you and just say fuck you.
Well, you know that old joke, right, about the lady who. She goes to this very, very elegant and posh party with all these people, and they're showing off their stuff. And they're showing off their things, and every time they say something about how fabulous they are or their things are, she's like, that's fabulous, that's fabulous, that's fabulous. And finally someone turns around and asks her, what your background, your education? She's like, oh, I went to charm school. It's like, oh, really, what did you learn there? She goes, I learned to say fabulous instead of bullshit.
Perfect.
So thank you, you wonderful bitchy women, for coming on my show again and talking about some damn serious topics. But I think, there needs to be these kind of discussions out there. We don't have to be sunshine and lollipops all the time. We can actually talk about like the non-deep, the unspoken. And I appreciate your willingness to do so.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thanks for providing the area to do it.
Absolutely. Some sacred space for some thoughts to happen.
Exactly.
Good night.
Night.